Paramount Global, in a move that made me audibly gasp while I was at work, my full-time job, as I, kind of check the news and check for stories to do on the show, in a move that made me audibly gasp in my office at my full-time job. Paramount Global has ended negotiations with Skydance. Just for some context, I think I read, I've been focusing on this since the beginning. You can find all my videos about the whole Paramount corporate merger acquisition drama. So obviously I'm invested in this, but I've only been doing the show for a couple months, right? So this is the one big corporate shuffling thing that I've been able to cover. But from my understanding, this is historic in how chaotic this is. I read an article the other day talking about it's not just it's not just recency bias and because this is one of the first things that I'm covering here on the show. This is just something the industry has never seen. Just in terms of the back and forth, all these different suitors, it's ridiculous. So the Redstone family's statement. So of course Shari Redstone, who owns a controlling stake in National Amusements, which in turn owns a controlling interest in Paramount. The family statement said, quote, NAI, which is National Amusements, I wonder the A, Incorporated Industries? Probably Incorporated. NAI is grateful to Skydance for their months of work in pursuing this potential transaction and looks forward to the ongoing successful production collaboration between Paramount and Skydance, end quote. So this definitely feels like damage control, basically being please Skydance, don't break up with us, because of course Paramount and Skydance collaborate, like it says, on a bunch of different projects, right? They definitely need to stay on good terms due to these franchises like Mission Impossible, like Top Gun, which essentially they co-own. So it's people talk about divorce. We have to stay together for the children, right? So this definitely feels like them being sorry we dragged you through all this. Please don't break up with us, right? The news sent the stock downward, and I think it is hit an all-time low. Since I think it's at the lowest it's been since the company was kind of reincorporated as Paramount Global with the merger of CBS and Viacom. And Deadline noted that shareholders obviously they didn't like the Skydance deal because of their shares were going to be undervalued compared to Shari Redstone's shares. So the shareholders didn't like this deal, but the stock still went down upon this news because now there's just a lot of uncertainty, right? I don't know what's worse, something that you don't like definitely happening or having no idea what's going to happen. And oftentimes that is an opportunity for a stock price to go down, right? So for context, the latest version of this deal, because Skydance has been trying to buy this for I think since late last year, right? It has gone through different changes, again, because shareholders weren't happy with the structure of it. The way it was going to work, it was this very complicated deal where essentially Skydance would buy Paramount and then merge with Paramount, essentially. And as part of this, the revised terms, Redstone would get a $2.25 billion payout, which is less than what she was going to originally get, and then the difference would go to regular shareholders like me. Both Skydance and Paramount seemed to have ironed out the final details for a deal. It seemed like this was about to happen. I think a week or two ago, I did a story about how it seems like this is going to happen now. It seems like all the parties seem to be kind of agreeing. Paramount Special Committee seemed to be working with Skydance fairly well to kind of figure out, work out the kinks of some of this. So it was ultimately in the hands of Shari Redstone, who ultimately decided to reject the deal. Which the reason why it made me audibly gasp at work is that, she was the biggest supporter of this for the longest time because, again, she would get disproportionately, benefit from the deal. And furthermore, she rejected the deal or sent a signal that she would reject the deal before the special committee could even officially vote on it, right? So this is just a huge story. At least to me. Maybe when I make these videos, I try to do some research on the hashtags and see how many videos are being made talking about a certain topic. These Paramount videos always don't have a huge. They rarely have a high hashtag. It seems like a lot of people aren't talking about this. I find this immensely fascinating. So why did she reject this deal? So there's a few reasons. It's not like she came out and said, "Here are my 5 reasons, but this more or less seems to be kind of the general consensus. There's like a couple reasons. So the LA Times reports that Redstone apparently wasn't very happy with that reduced payout that Skydance, devised. They came up with this plan to in a way to appease shareholders. She wasn't happy about that. The LA Times also reports that Redstone wanted shareholders, even the non-voting ones, to vote on a deal, because essentially Paramount has dual class shares, where there's like the voting shares and the non-voting shares. She wanted this deal to be put to a vote, where even the shareholders that typically wouldn't have a vote would get to vote. And Skydance refused, which makes sense again because most of the shareholders that were mad about this were the non-voting ones who felt like they were gonna get screwed by the deal. She also reportedly wanted legal protection from any such lawsuits because of shareholder anger. And she wants Skydance to pay for that, and it seemed like Skydance wasn't really willing to do that. And a big issue here, again, is how complicated this deal is. It's like this 2-step process where essentially Skydance, like I said, has to acquire National Amusements and Paramount, and then they would merge with Paramount, and then there's all these, like, who's getting paid what, and then there's all these legal issues. So there have been many, many other offers, which I'll talk about. I'll just put a pin in that. I'll talk about in a second. All of which are way simpler. They just buy it. They just buy Paramount, right? And it seems like Shari Redstone maybe felt that a better deal may come along. So she wouldn't have to compromise on the payout, right? So now, what does Skydance do? So now Skydance has to move forward, right? We have a quote here, I think in a memo from David Ellison to the staff at Skydance saying, quote, "Skydance is stronger than ever because of you. When we are stronger because of this process." I feel like this should have been, sidebar, he should have recorded this with like inspirational music behind it. Let me start over, I'm sorry. "Skydance is stronger than ever because of you, and we are stronger because of this process. For starters, we are smarter. We know more about our business, our potential, and the marketplace at large. We are more confident than ever, not just about Skydance, but about the future of entertainment and our ability to continue building a next-generation content company on our terms with the greatest capital, creative, and technological resources and talent in the industry. The bottom line, our future is incredibly bright, and tomorrow we will keep building to make it even better." End quote. That was a lot of trying to make yourself feel better because of all this. But I think there is something to the idea. I think this experience has definitely leveled up the company. Again, like the fact that ultimately Skydance is not a huge, huge company, right? It's ultimately a, production company, first and foremost. It's not this huge distributor. So the fact that it was in this protracted, high-profile negotiation to acquire one of the few remaining classic Hollywood studios really kind of gives Skydance an extra level of credibility that I'm sure David Ellison is trying to figure out how can we leverage this increased exposure, right? So what are the other options, right? So what are these other potential deals or avenues that Paramount and Shari Redstone could go with? So, of course, there's always the Sony Apollo deal. So, of course, Apollo Global Management, the private equity firm, teamed up with Sony to offer $26 billion for Paramount. There'd be some regulatory concern since Sony is a foreign company and they would own, at least partially own CBS, which is like a regulatory issue. But those could be solved. The company, though, would probably get broken up and sold for parts, which I know Shari Redstone really didn't want to do. She wanted to try to maintain the empire, the media empire her late father, Sumner Redstone, had built over like 30 years. But it seems like they might not even really be that interested anymore anyway. It sounds like, Sony and Apollo have kind of silently moved on. Then, of course, there's Byron Allen. This is literally the second story I ever did, the first live stream I did. And you can go back if you want to watch it. Byron Allen, the media mogul, he had tried to buy BET from Paramount before, and it didn't happen. He owns the Weather Channel. He originally made like a $30 billion offer, but he was rejected pretty quickly. And then, of course, there's a potential merger with Warner Brothers Discovery. There was a period, I think, like late last year that David Zaslav and Paramount had sat down to potentially discuss a merger. It seemed unlikely at the time, but maybe now that Paramount's in a weaker state, the stock is at a cheaper price, maybe Zaslav feels like maybe he could swoop in and get a better deal. And then there were some new contenders that emerged, and this was gonna be the story. that these new contenders arose to make a bid on Paramount. And then all this ended with Skydance. That really is the bigger story. But we have some new suitors in the story. We have Edgar Bronfman Jr. and Bain Capital. Bain Capital is like a private equity firm. Bronfman currently serves as the executive chairman of Fubo, like the sports streaming app. He was formerly the chairman and CEO of Warner Music Group. He's reportedly putting together a $2.5 billion offer for National Amusements, right? So that way they would own Paramount indirectly, through National Amusements, and that way that would give Shari Redstone an out, from the whole thing, right? Then there's also Stephen Paul, who I've never heard of. He's like a producer and filmmaker of like the Baby Geniuses franchise. He's also apparently trying to line up about a $3 billion offer for National Amusements. But with all those suitors in mind, there's still a good chance that Redstone just decides to go it alone, just go forward. Sans merger acquisition, right? They created this, they basically ousted their CEO and created the office of the CEO with these 3 different executives. They recently just got severance protection, right? Just in case that some merger happens, because like if the Skydance deal was going to go through, they would probably be removed from their positions. But in any case, it seems like, the office of the CEO, these 3 executives, they're moving ahead with their plans, and perhaps their job is to just improve Paramount in the short term, to attract new buyers, entice old ones, just to kind of do some damage control and then move on. And again, I didn't read all the details, but the severance package would be like very, very generous. So again, yeah, Shari could maybe just decide to just sell her stake in National Amusements to a non-media company and then just move on, right? Like this third party, right? And then I have one more Hail Mary idea. Again, as an individual and as a person, I would not like this, but this seems like it could be an interesting business move. You know who could buy Paramount? Netflix. Because Paramount's market cap is about $7 billion. Netflix's market cap is, let me get the exact figure here, $291 billion, right? Huge difference. And we talked about earlier in the live stream, but if you're watching this after the fact as a separate video, you're gonna have to go watch those videos. I talked about, streaming has moved from growth to profitability. And what is not always profitable, but at least can be profitable? Theatrical distribution. So maybe Netflix could shock everybody and acquire Paramount, making certain franchises Netflix exclusive, dismantle Paramount Plus, which is by far the worst of all of the streaming services that were created, pre-COVID, like right before COVID. I think it debuted during COVID, but like that kind of period where everyone was trying to create their own streaming site. It's the worst one, so get rid of it. Have everything go to Netflix. It would be a very radical move, but again, it could give Netflix better positioning as streaming shifts from growth to profitability. It would give them a theatrical arm that way they could have their films be in theaters for, even if it's a short period of distribution, like actually have a theatrical run, as opposed to like they'll sometimes do like a week or like one night. And that could, as the calculus in the streaming wars change, having that ability in-house might be really valuable for them. But in any case, every time I think this story is almost over, it just gets more complicated and more interesting.